Good afternoon. Delighted to be with you today. Apostolic preference number 2, to walk with the poor, the outcasts of the world, those whose dignity has been violated, is a mission of reconciliation and justice. It is our mission. It's who we are, it's what we do, and it's why we exist. Walls today have really become far too convenient an excuse to dehumanize, to label, to exclude those that we deem other or outcast or refugee or immigrant. They have become political artillery, and they must be dismantled. Hope itself is threatened in this context, it might appear, except hope is far more courageous and vigilant and aggressive in ways that we don't always anticipate. Hope itself places us in a position to see beyond the now, to move beyond the discouragement, and to face life beyond our fears. I'd ask Joe to put the next slide up, a poem on hope for our consideration this afternoon. Hope is a blood-borne pathogen, the seed of martyrs, inflaming that allergy to injustice, present in us all, infected by a singular epiphany of friend and foe alike. Hope is in us, whether we like it or not. It desires to be seen and heard. It demands a reckoning, and it's part of our own salvation story. We must pay attention to hope. We must also pay attention to temptation to despair. I see hope as an irreducible reality within the human person. Ignatius certainly saw that through his ups and downs, his highs and lows, his many consolations and desolations. He clung to hope. And sometimes that may have been all that he clung to, in addition to his faith. And so hope is rooted sometimes in brute force that violence and dehumanization cannot destroy. And that's good news, I think. In the letter of Adolfo Nicolas on reconciliation and the teaching of Pope Francis, they both noted that how we look at reality changes because of the nature of our faith. Reconciliation and justice are one act of love. When we look at reality with the eyes of faith, we must look for signs of hope. We must see God at work, bringing about the resurrection. Adolfo Nicolas and Pope Francis both share this vision of reconciliation as a place where faith, justice, and solidarity with those who are poor are the central elements of reconciliation. And so while these 4 universal apostolic preferences may seem fairly new, the work the congregation and society have been doing around reconciliation and justice are continual threads in each of the 4. The crisis that we face today is not a human crisis, it's not an ecological crisis, they're not separate crises, it's one. It's one human crisis with complexity. It's both social and environmental. And at its heart is a way that we can become more human together by pulling on the bonds of community, of what truly makes us human and helps us see the connection between ourselves and one we might name as other, but in fact is a brother and a sister. Ignatius's first companions were those who were poor. So it's no surprising that in 2019, this theme is part of the work that we're called to do together, to pay attention again, to accompany the poor, to accompany those on the margins, to see those who are not seen, who aren't at the tables of power, perhaps not in our dorms or at our dining halls or in our classrooms, but who have potential, capacity, hopes, dreams. And we must be part of that liberation as well, because our salvation depends on it. This crisis is also an opportunity, as we know, to see the very nature of human community as part of the joy of living. And there's so much we can do together, but there's very little that we can do alone. The poor challenge us. They disturb us. They raise questions. They prick our conscience. They bother us by contrast. And so, in the Ignatian tradition, we must listen deeply, or as Howard Gray would say, with attention, reverence, and devotion. That act of listening is an act of protest. It's a gospel act. We must tune in beyond the noise of the culture, beyond a culture of distraction. We must tune in to hear the cries of those in the world today who are very easy to ignore with our 24/7 media blitz, with tweets that outrage and then numb and then are ignored. And so that attentive listening is part of what we do as universities, to read the signs of the times, to listen to the urgent unmet needs in society, and to leverage the teaching, research, and service of our universities to their good. When we read the signs of the times, we can get overwhelmed, but hope is the river that runs through it. On the next slide, I just want to lift up some of the numbers of people on the move today as we look at who are the poor and the marginalized. This will be available offline so you can take a closer look. But if you see the staggering numbers, 70.8 million people on our planet are on the move. Those are internally displaced persons. Those are refugees. Those are asylum seekers. Without exception, most of those will be poor. And so how do we respond to this global crisis? There has never been this many people on the move at one time, not even after World War II. And so what can we do and what must we do as we look at this? How do we change the systems and the structures that prevent the free movement of people in ways that seek their benefit and their human thriving? And so to listen requires intellect, courage, connecting the heart and the hands and the feet. We need all of our capacities, all of the intelligence that we have, especially as colleges and universities, to disrupt the status quo, to be agents of social change. And so part of our work, no matter what our role is at our colleges and universities, is to ask better questions, have a broader horizon, see who's missing, and make sure we do everything in our power to bring them to the table. We must probe where the injustices are rooted in power and privilege that deny abundant life, that deform and dehumanize others, and actually dehumanize and deform ourselves as well. Because until we recognize we're one human family, what we think we do to others, we're doing to ourselves. And so we need to be agents of liberation, of hope, of change. Our salvation depends on it. And we must ask what the systems and structures are doing to protect the privileged and the powerful at the cost of those who are on the move and on the margins. And the next slide, Joe. And we can be numbed by statistics and by facts and by rhetoric and by denial. But every human migration has a human face and a human story, and has a heart and has hopes and has dreams and connections and loves. And so as we look at this apostolic preference, there's something every single one of us can do. And I think as we look at this reality that's before us on our screens, on our televisions at home, on our mobile devices, John Sobrino would ask us and remind us that our task as educators is to help our students awaken from the slumber of inhumanity, from their cultures of distraction, and to take the crucified people down from their crosses. The eruption of the poor, this global scale of poverty and suffering, violence, exclusion, is not an opportunity for pity or lament, but it is a call of action. And it's something that we are well positioned to address. It is up to us then, as AJCU leaders, knowledge creators, professors, professionals, to leverage the teaching, the research, and the service of our universities to these urgent, unmet needs of our time. With that, I'll yield the floor and invite some conversation.
Who are we really? Jesuit educators, members of the Ignatian family, leaders, administrators, professors. Who are we becoming more of? The preference to look specifically at the poor, those that have been outcast, those that have been violated, is really an invitation for us to consider who the poor, who the outcast, and who the violated is amongst us in our Jesuit family, on our campuses, in the urban locales of our cities and communities where our campuses have been located for hundreds of years. At least many of us have been in places for at least over 100 years, decades. And how might we consider this particular calling that we have, using our mission, our tradition, and our values as anchor institutions in the United States with a particular and a peculiar calling and Jesuit tradition to be the change agents where we're located. I believe that now, more than ever, that Jesuit institutions are actually being called out of almost any other institution in the United States, that we have an opportunity as leaders to step into our power, our privilege, as well as our duty to respond to this preference much beyond an institutional way, but in a very personal, very real way. And so my question is really around, who are we really? And the reason why I asked that, as Joe asked me to prepare my thoughts, as he had said before, I'm a Chief Diversity Officer and I've been building equity and inclusivity in a Jesuit capacity at the University of San Francisco for the last almost 13 years now. But I've also been in the body that I am as a Black identified executive woman of color, entering my 26th year in higher education, and the daughter of parents who migrated to California from the rural southern states, who never participated in an integrated society until they were able to come to California, and never had participated in an integrated school or work environment until they were able to come. And how am I standing here before you, being able to talk about this particular preference and not be able to do it in a way that I can't not bring my whole self to this? And I'm a member of the Ignatian family. I'm a partner, I'm a companion in advancing this remarkable mission and tradition that we hold. Yet I'm doing it at a time when we are faced with the most turbulent, hateful, divisive reality that is happening in our country. Now is the time for us to really consider, who are we really? What does it mean to be a Jesuit educator? We have the hashtag Jesuit Educated, that those of us that have been able to participate and actually be Jesuit educated, we feel very good about. I myself, I'm a kid from California, and I didn't come to Jesuit education until 2008, so I'm a public school kid. And so in many ways, I'm a new member of this family. And I have been very thoughtfully and mindfully integrating everything this tradition means and holds and affords in an effort to forcefully advance what we've been called to do. But one of the things that I think I've brought in the last 13 years as a newer member of the family is that I think I could bring a critique based around my racialized experience in this country, based around my gendered experience in higher education, based around the ways in which we have a rhetoric of who is poor, who is outcast, who has been violated, but at the same time have a lack of capacity to understand what is our part in it. I think that what this particular preference is calling us to do is to break away from this invisibility that is in and among us, even as we are doing this remarkable and beautiful work as a beloved community. I think that we are being called, the ICP colleagues specifically, but all of us that are a part of this particular work, this Jesuit work, is to think about who are the individuals who are the poor amongst us. We talk about reconciliation. You cannot reconcile if you're not able to tell the truth. The work that we have, I think, is both personally, building upon what Deborah said earlier, but then collectively thinking about what are the ways in which do we reconcile our ways of not knowing who has been the poor amongst us, who has been violated and who is outcast amongst us on our campuses now as well as in the past. And then we have to talk about justice from beyond a conceptual framework. We love to talk about social justice. But I think it's important to talk about justice and name it. Are we talking about gender justice? And who does that mean? Are we talking about trans justice for individuals who are gender nonconforming? And who is that on our campuses and what does that mean? Are we talking about immigration justice and individuals who have been undocumented, who are in our classrooms, who might actually work for us or work for a third-party entity in which they are employed on our campuses and are serving our students, but yet they are completely invisible and unseen to us in leadership roles? Are we talking about disability justice for individuals who have had a lifetime of invisibility around the ways in which they engage the educational institutions as well as the educational buildings and spaces, particularly when the institutions have been led by able-bodied individuals? Are we talking about racial justice? And there's so much to be said about that, particularly since it wasn't even within the last 5 to 7 years we are able to talk about unconscious bias and implicit bias. But 10 years ago, you could not have brought that up on a campus and people would not have known what you're talking about. But anybody that had experienced it would be able to tell you exactly what implicit bias is. But now we have a common language around it. So we are able to understand that there might actually be issues around racial justice on our campuses because we have language to help us understand that. I think the opportunity that we have as we look at this preference around the poor, the outcasts, and the violated and amongst us, I think we're being invited to look at an institutional framework that begins with reflection, but it doesn't end there. A personal reflection that helps us understand where are we as it relates to the poor, the violated, and the outcast that we are being asked to respond to. The second part is asking us to reconcile that. How do we go about reconciling ourselves personally with what we've missed completely? With the conditions that have gone on in our neighborhoods or on our campuses, but until we were able to see various groups of students around the country put forth, whether it comes forth in student demands, whether it comes forth in other type of ways that were unknown to us, but they've always been present. We have to reconcile ourselves with that. We respond to issues, but we have to reconcile with those things. And then the very last piece is what I like to call is reclamation. Reclamation is a process of claiming something, of reasserting a right. I believe it's our right to assert that not only do we care deeply about these issues, but we will be doing and responding to them. But without reflection on a personal level, without reconciliation on an institutional level, we're not able to do the reclamation work, which is really to respond to the preference. And so, along with Catherine's questions, I just want us to think about who are we really? And secondly, who is the poor, the outcast, and the violated amongst us? In my specific work, on my campus, in my department, in my division, in my community. And I wanted you to think about it through the lens of equity. Equity is an opportunity for us to realize what justice means. And I gave some examples from the University of San Francisco. We decided to name the justice issues to go beyond talking about social justice. So we name it. We say gender justice. We say trans justice. We say disability justice. We say immigration justice. We say racial justice. And we have a multitude of programs and initiatives that respond that are curricular and co-curricular as well as community engaged, so that to help hold us accountable to the justice in which we are seeking to reconcile with ourselves as well as with the communities that we're situated in. So with that, I invite us to think about those things, and both Catherine and I will be available afterwards. Thank you.